Hope Sent a Quiver, written by OrionLady on AO3, read by Alextris. Chapter 12. Everybody overslept too long to fret much about last night or the revelation of their forest guest, and the usual Friday special breakfast became a mad dash of feet and grabby hands and combing hair on the fly. Laura had never braided Lila's hair so fast. Cooper practically inhaled his chocolate chip pancakes after throwing a red binder at Clint. "I got it," Clint assured him. "You need this assignment for today?" "Not due until next week." "Perfect." Clint popped over to Nate next and bent over him upside down to make the boy grin. "You feeling okay today, bub, after what happened?" Nate nodded, tickling Clint's nose.
"Not scared anymore."
"Good." Clint blew out a breath. "That is the best news I've heard all day." "Shoes!" Laura clapped her hands and up they all went from the breakfast table, around Ticket to Ride board game pieces they forgot to put away last night. Even Nate, who didn't go anywhere for school, but loved to copy his siblings. "Me and my car are leaving in 10 minutes for the bus stop. Up, up!" Also a general rule in their house, whoever made breakfast was exempt from driving duties. Clint helped Nate with the chickens. He gave Tina an extra long lecture about not running off, and waited until he and Laura and the teens drove away, waving at them, before sneaking into the trees, box of pancakes under one arm and a plastic grocery bag in the other. A lucky stroke that Nate had decided to see his siblings off today, as it allowed Clint to take his time. He walked past the archery target and deeper into the woods, past the half-formed treehouse. The trip took him 3 minutes today, loafing around vernal hyacinth bushes and wild baby's breath waking from the cold ground. "Morning, Pete." Clint tapped on the trash bag curtain. "I'm coming in." No answer, and Clint's mouth dried out. Had Pete run off after the incident last night? It made sense that if he was already feeling guilty or scared of hurting them, the Nate's presence would shake him. What if he was injured too somehow and had hidden it from Nate? What if he... Clint ducked under the curtain and all his questions went out the window. Pete was still asleep. He lay facing Clint in one of Cooper's old cable knit sweaters today. Bags under his eyes spoke of a fitful night, and those extra long curls framed lines around his mouth. He was starting to look like what Clint's crazy uncle used to call a hippie. "All right." Clint couldn't wrangle the tender tone if he tried. "That's all right, Pete. Everyone needs to lie in sometimes, especially teens." Clint parked himself on the ground against the tree by Pete's head. He nibbled on a pancake while he sat and watched the forest wake up. Clint waved the open box of pancakes under Pete's nose, just in case, but no dice. It had no effect other than a murmur in his sleep. "Really tired, then." Clint lost himself in the inner workings of Pete's sylvan slice of the world. The morning doves cooing their song. One pine tree whistled in the wind, but not the other, too old and established to bend. The wildlife that came and left through the clearing. A wet turtle covered in moss and mud of all things scuttled past Clint's boot on its way from the creek and its long winter nap. Clint snapped a picture with his phone. Nate would love it, and probably try to paint a picture of the thing like he'd done for every single one of their hens. The hammock shuddered. "Pete?" "A few more minutes, May." Clint paused. He looked up at the boy's peaceful face, nose in a rabbit-like twitch on his way to consciousness. It would be so easy to ask who this person, May, was. Clint bit it back on the edge of his tongue. Pete deserved to tell his story when he was ready, and not a moment sooner, if he ever did. Clint was starting to savor this time with the boy the way he did Nate's demands for bedtime stories, knowing from experience that it always ended too soon. Pete's hand drifted up with a stretch. He tapped the letter C to his eye. "Yeah, Pete, it's Clint." Hey to you too. Clint smiled at the boy's button lows in one last twitch before sleep-sticky brown eyes finally opened for the day. There he is. Pete just watched him for a minute while his brain booted the startup menu. He dangled his hand off the lip of the hammock, a clear request. Clint grasped it with a warm fizz in his belly. Good morning, Mr. Aloha. Long night? Bad dreams. Emotion hit Clint like a dozen needle-tipped darts at how easily Pete admitted it, without fear of mockery or repercussion. He might not tell Clint the content of those dreams, but just to be able to confess out loud that he had them was huge. I'm sorry to hear it. Pete shrugged. Nate okay? My flashlight battery was dying on the walk back. Yeah, bud. Shook up more than anything. Clint squeezed his hand. I don't even know how to properly thank you for what you did. My son would still be... he'd be gone, Pete. But instead, he sat at breakfast inhaling my pancakes and babbling about how to tie a shoelace, all because of you. Thank you. Pete reddened with a flick of those paintbrush eyelashes. It's not... If you say it's not a big deal, I'm dyeing all your clothes bubblegum pink. Pete chuffed. His hand slipped out of Clint's to explore the container on his knees. Oh, I see how it is. You don't want to have a touching Hallmark moment here. You just want me for my pancakes. They smell good, said Pete, a tad defensive. Clint laughed. All yours, kid. Eat up. Laura and I have a bet to see who makes a better pancake, if you eat them all. She thinks you'll want more when you're through with these. The red deepened to a purple. There are 9 in here. Not a no, Pete. Pete mumbled incoherently and stuffed a pancake in his mouth. Clint had already pre-poured syrup over them, so they glistened in the pale daylight, sufficiently spongy. Maybe too much sugar for Pete's shrunken stomach, but Clint was willing to risk it to treat the boy. Did Nate wake you up last night? Pete shrugged again, which Clint took as a yes. He's a cute kid, said Pete. I saw the chicken first, actually. She peeked at my backpack, picked her up, and followed the sound of crying to the creek. Clint sucked in a breath. This stretch of creek broadened into a near river, with rapids and whirlpools the height of his chest. Nate wouldn't have stood a chance had he taken a few more steps. He also told me about Pippa, the barnyard bully. Clint grinned. I bet he did. It's crazy because Nate didn't say his first word until he was almost 4, just before the snap, which is why we taught him a few signs. That explains it, Pete muttered. It surprised me when he answered my "Are you hurt?" sign by showing me his hands. Yeah. All those doctors and psychologists earned their paychecks with Nate's case. And then one day, out of nowhere, he's moulding Play-Doh and says, "Clouds, Daddy," pointing out the window. Turns out he was just a late talker. Now we can't get him to shut up. Went from mute to incurable chatterbox in a week. I liked it. He sounded out the words on my shirt. Thank you again for leading him home. I mean it. It's what you do, right? Helping people around the neighborhood is your thing. Pete fumbled with his third pancake. He gaped at Clint, eyes wide and amazed, and a lively spark caught fire in them, one Clint had never seen before. Like a faulty lighter, it fizzled and died a few times on rotation. It made the boy look like himself. Actually himself. The tether lilted, warmed, a lasso left out on the noonday sun. What did you say? Pete whispered. Clint thumbed his wrist. I just mean... What do you mean, Clint? Even he wasn't sure suddenly. A hazy spot in his mind scorched at the edges. It almost felt like the time... Clint shook himself out of torturous memories. I mean, you're a gracious-hearted kid, that's all. You fixed my hearing aid, you found Lyla's arrow, so it stands to reason you helped Nate. Laura wanted to give you a thank you hug, but I warded her off. Though there is a quiche under the pancakes, just for you. Oh. Pete put a hand to his heart. Clint felt his pulse racing through the fingers on his wrist. Oh, yeah, right. Thanks. Clint let Pete garbage disposal his way through every last one of those pancakes and start in on the mini quiche before saying the dreaded words. Pete ate the quiche in his fingers, not allowing so much as a crumb to get away. An impressive feat. Pete, there's one other thing, and I'm sorry it had to happen. Uh-oh, said Pete, but Clint didn't buy the attempt at sarcasm. He parted gentle fingers through Pete's hair while he finished chewing. It turned out to be a lofty endeavour with how thick and matted his locks were, caked with substances Clint didn't even want to guess at. His large hand dwarfed the boy's head, that precious head and his precious heart, the one that somehow remained willing to go the extra mile for people in spite of the fact that no one had treated him well. Clint woke up crying about it sometimes. Pete swallowed and steeled himself. So did Clint. Pete, when we brought Nate home, he mentioned you. Pete went Asian. I'm sorry, kid, but Lyla and Cooper know about you now too, so that makes for everybody in my family. I had to tell them you're out there for their sakes and yours. Pete shot up from the hammock, still entangled in the comforter. He fell to his knees, hopped back up. Clint got to his feet slower, hands raised. Easy, hey, I can go. No, please, God, no. Pete, I don't want that. Laura and I desperately want you to stay, and so does Cooper. And Nate, who I'm pretty sure has claimed you as his new best friend. Pete stumbled into a tight pacing loop, like the day he read that amnesia passage in the spy novel. He frazzled nervous fingers through his curls. I shouldn't be causing them or causing strain for your family. Yeah, I'll find a bus stop, or walk to a park, or... Pete, can you listen to me for a sec? Pete didn't even hear him, already stuffing loose clothes and shoes into his backpack where he struggled to untie it from the tree with shaky fingers. Something inside Clint reached a breaking point. He lost a breath. Son. They both stopped. Completely stopped. Not a gasp or flinch or cry between the two of them. The world hesitated on its axis. Pete nodded, but kept his side profile aimed to Clint. No eye contact. Clint couldn't speak for a moment, too focused on the boy's dingy profile and unwavering compass needle in his eyes. Loyalty, pain, longing. He'd walk into a vat of acid right now if Clint asked him to, completely at the mercy of whatever Clint said next, thanks to that one word. I don't lie or offer things I don't mean. Clint dared to close the gap a few steps. When I said you can stay here as long as you want, that was true. It hasn't changed just because my family knows about you. You need help, and we want to give it. Besides, we need help of a sort too. Pete turned. An undercurrent in the air warned Clint against touching for a bit, but he responded to the curiosity in Pete's eyes by tugging out the binder and stuffed mint green triceratops. This is Trike. Clint handed him the dinosaur first, about the size of a small toaster. Nate wants you to have a cuddle buddy for your hammock or wherever you sleep. Trike is apparently the best cure for nightmares, and likes to eat peanut butter. Or so I'm told by the animal manager in our house, of both the animate and inanimate variety. Pete's fingers closed in the soft toy with unabashed amazement. Fondness too, the same look Laura gave Nate whenever he did something silly but cute. He rubbed Trike's 3 tiny horns and darker green frill on the back of the dinosaur's head. A toothy half-smile crept out of hiding. The wobble in Clint's knees steadied at the sight, as it always did whenever Pete looked close at his real age. And this is from Cooper. If you're still up for marking his pre-calc homework, he Threw in some physics too. Pete tucked Trike under one elbow to open the binder. He honest to God rocked forward on his toes like a schoolgirl meeting her crush for the first time. Clint bumped him up the scale to hopeless nerd, maybe even dweeb territory. Then the kid on Christmas expression crumbled. I shouldn't. This again. Why not, Pete? Give me one good reason. Pete closed the binder. You already have the perfect life. I'm ruining it, getting it all dirty. Those few words cost everything inside Pete to say. The truth of that settled into Clint when Pete's hands balled up in his shirt front, mouth firm against a quiver. Can I let you in on a factoid here? Pete looked up and met Clint's eyes. Clint unwadded Pete's hand from his shirt, loosening the rigor mortis fingers. The touch warmed both of their cold hands. Semi-retirement sucked for a while there. Pete's lips smoothed. I mean, hell, it's better than getting shot at every day. I don't miss being an agent or an Avenger, and seeing my kids grow up, all those daily milestones, it's everything. But some hurts run too deep for karaoke parties and finger painting. Pete nodded, all sympathy. Dang kid. Clint wanted to knock a little selfishness into him, get him to put what he wanted first. After, well, everything. It was a performance art. Being the dad my kids need. Clint nodded at Pete's surprise. It's less so with every passing day, but to be alone in grief, this very specific kind that comes with watching friends die in exchange for what I have now, it's crippling. That old look was back on Pete's face, but for once it comforted Clint. Again he looked a peer in the eyes, in ways he couldn't even fully pass out. Case in point. Laura helps, and she's my anchor, but she doesn't understand it either. Then, one day that lonely room in my soul has company. Miserable, dejected company, but I wasn't alone. Pete shrugged off Clint's hand, but Clint didn't let him go farther. The day I found you in the woods, Pete, it woke me up. What? Pete breathed. Yeah. You understand that weird niche brand of grief because you're living it right now, though I don't know all the details. No one has the perfect life, kid. Not even me, and I pretty much have everything a person could want. A tear slipped into the curls around Pete's cheek. His lips trembled. Not ruining anything? No, Pete. Clint thumbed the tear away. If anything, you make my life better. Far better. I don't think I could go back to the way things were before you came along. It'd wreck me. Pete dropped the binder to wrap his arms around himself in a self-hug, and that just wouldn't do. He was gunning for most waif-like boy at this rate. And really, what kind of an Avenger was Clint if he didn't fix that immediately? Clint pulled the kid into a loose hug, and they swayed in the clearing for a few minutes. Pete hugged loosely back and buried his face in his favourite spot, Clint's sternum, and got it all wet in a way that hit Clint better than any drug ever could. Pete's fist tapped Clint's back between his shoulder blades. The thunk, the thunk, the thunk. My heartbeat? Pete nodded. Like it. You can hear that? Mm-hmm. Wonderkind, said Clint. He kissed the shell of Pete's ear. Please don't leave. I won't. Clint breathed a watery thanks over him, diaphragm inhaling its first full breath in 5 minutes. You're still safe here, Pete. I promise. The kids know not to trouble you or even to come into the woods, though Nate might want to come and visit sometime. Pete murmured in his throat, then, Cooper really wants me to help with his homework. Was excited about it. He's really stressed with math that has a real-world context, like physics. The minute you add cars and velocity and falling objects into the mix, he's lost. Pete pulled back, Trike still under one arm, and retrieved the binder off the ground. When I come back tomorrow, I can pick up Coop's homework. Oh, no, said Pete, wiping his nose. Just give me 10 minutes. Kid, I really don't think you understand how many formulas. Pete used the bottom of the hammock as a table and set to work at once, marking up equations using the mechanical pencil Cooper had left clipped to the inside binder ring at a dizzying speed. Pete whizzed through them like they were a word search puzzle. Out of 12 long-form questions, Pete finished marking 5 by the time Clint packed up the empty pancake container. Trike was still huddled close under Pete's other arm. Clint ran a hand down his face and pretended his wasn't smiling like a loon. Why do I even bother assuming any more with you? He hiked back a few hours later, after sharing more carny stories with Pete while he marked and answering a few of Pete's questions about his kids. He seemed especially interested in Cooper's art and FX experience. Not to mention Lyla's archery and how it felt to teach the kids something that was just so intrinsic to Clint's upbringing. Clint left feeling like he'd just eaten a giant Thanksgiving dinner, stuffed and happy. A reverse mimicry of last night, a pale speck waited for Clint when he came within sight of the house. Upon closer inspection, it morphed into Lyla, arms folded on the porch. She didn't waste even a second of time.
Were you with Peter just now?
Clint stopped, hands on his hips. Why aren't you at school? He countered.
I changed my mind during the drive to the bus stop when I felt shaky. Mum said I could take a mental health day.
Clint sighed, not wanting to argue for reasons such as, but not limited to, A. Cohesive parenting was important and he and Laura didn't dispute the other's decision in front of the kids, and B. He was proud of Lyla for knowing what she needed and when her emotional state required a recharge. But also, he very much wanted to argue when he saw the stubborn set of her lips. Lyla.
You went to see him again, didn't you?
Yes, I did. He needs food every day too, Lyla huffed. Clint left the container on the steps and pointed to the porch swing. Park yourself, young lady. Lyla did, leaving space for Clint on her right, though her arms remained tightly folded. Clint lowered himself with an old man groan. He wrapped an arm around Lyla's shoulders and she leaned her head on his chest. Score 1 for the home team. Clint rocked the swing with his foot, metal frame creaking, just like he did with Pete's hammock sometimes. Somewhere inside the house, Nate practiced his reading and phonics while Laura coached him along with sing-song praises. You jealous, Lyla?
What? Not even close.
Lyla made a face.
You spend lots of time with us, more even in recent weeks. And had it not been for last night, I never would have known you go into the woods every day for hours at a time.
Great. Okay. Clint crossed that off the list of suspects. Lyla too pushed at the floor with a harsh shove of her toe, and it juddered at the impetus dissonance. With a silent boot tread, Clint stabilized the motion.
Do you remember that time we went to Dairy Queen after my soccer game in 4th grade?
Asked Lyla. Clint exhaled through his nose. Unfortunately, yes.
That guy came up to us and told you a sob story that probably wasn't true to get you to pay for his family's meals. All 7 of them. Then he started yelling about how the Avengers barely saved New York.
I do. And that was how you found out that not only am I not made of money, but you can't help every single person in the world, can't fix everyone's problems. All I could do was listen to his story and say I was sorry for his loss.
I learned something else that day, Lyla insisted.
Oh? Lyla didn't elaborate, however. She just shifted on his chest so she could look up at him. Just what?
I worry that Pete is like that with you.
That he'll yell at me?
He recognizes you, doesn't he?
Clint nodded, slow. He knows I'm Hawkeye, yeah. Or was. Still can't get him to call me Clint out loud, though, no matter what I tell him.
Lyla's eyes darkened. A suspect that wasn't even on the list blitzed through Clint's brain in a newscast ticker tape.
Lyla, are you scared he's taking advantage of me? Clint didn't mean to sound amused, but it slipped out.
Yeah, I don't know, I think so. Lyla's eyes fell back down. I know he'd never physically hurt you, probably can't. But you're generous. People know you, and sometimes they think that means you'll help them no matter what.
Lyla, baby. Clint held her close. Sometimes you are so much like me, it hurts to look at.
Lyla scoffed in an apropos teenage manner. What's that supposed to mean?
You're protective, hun, and I appreciate it, but Pete wouldn't even accept my help for the first 2 weeks.
Lyla blinked. He wouldn't?
Nope. Kept trying to give back what I offered or ignored me completely. He doesn't see me as a golden goose, Bug. Not even sure something like that has or ever would cross his mind.
One of Lyla's arms snaked out from the crunched posture to wrap around Clint's middle. He stroked down her braid.
Did you stay home from school just to make sure I was okay?
Lyla wavered, then nodded.
Thank you for caring, for having my back. But you don't have to do that. Clint rocked them a little more. I take care of you, remember? I've had lots of practice.
You always watch our 6, Lyla recited.
That's right.
Lyla hummed, a habit picked up from Laura, and one that sent a confusing emotional bouquet through Clint to realize she shared with Pete. He was really sweet tonight, said Lyla, hesitant, then gaining confidence. Saved his life.
Yeah, he did.
Nate told me at breakfast that Pete made up a story about going to space in a giant donut when Nate got scared of the dark, to distract him.
Of course he did.
Clint needed to buy that boy a fruit basket or something. Or a textbook basket. He'd probably appreciate literature more.
There, you see?
Clint jostled her lightly.
Pete's not the monster you were expecting. He's a gentle-hearted kid who's been through the ringer.
I guess. Lyla played with the button on Clint's flannel shirt. Promise me you'll be careful?
You're starting to sound like your mother.
Dad.
I'm already being careful, sweetheart, but I promise. I'm not so desperate to help that I can't keep a level head and spot any manipulation.
Clint wanted to laugh at the very thought of Pete trying to manipulate him. Other than a wicked case of puppy dog eyes, Pete didn't have a devious bone in his body, and even the puppy dog eyes were incidental. Clint was bet his life savings Pete didn't know he had them. Thanks. So, what's this surprise in the woods if it's not Pete? Clint tickled under her chin.
Nice try. I don't give up my secrets that easily.
Lyla swatted his hand, giggling. Oh, come on, not even a hint?
Let's just say we all need a retreat once in a while.
Monday approached in an odd conveyor belt slope, inevitable and sharp. It hung over the house in a nebulous asphalt cloud, threatening tense silences and disrupted sleep. Anything that had to be better than last year, the locked doors, crying over random things. Clint feared a repeat. But they all remained chipper throughout the weekend, binging black and white movies and indulging Nate's request for copious games of hide and seek, very much confined to inside, as none of them were keen for a repeat of Thursday. Clint remained undefeated, but the kids voted that his espionage skills at hiding didn't count and declared Laura the winner. Typical. After bringing Pete his Saturday breakfast, Clint helped Lyla and Nate bake gummy worm brownies. They belted out horrendous renditions of 70s rock hits and coaxed out some of Laura's wilder dance moves from her cheerleading days. By the time they reached American Woman, Clint left them to it and tracked down Cooper upstairs. He sat on the edge of Cooper's desk. Pete finished going through all of this? Cooper stared at his homework, precisely corrected and organised. His brows had long since disappeared into his hair. Even the calc homework? He threw in some remedial reading suggestions too. Holy crap. Cooper sat back on his desk chair. I'd love to meet him. He sounds wicked smart, and like he'd be a blast to talk to. Clint waffled on whether to share details revealed in private, and decided this one couldn't hurt. Pete says he used to go to a special school, just for STEM stuff. That's insane! I definitely want his help for college applications. Clint smiled. He loves science, so I don't think he'd mind. At first, I thought he did it to pay Laura and I back somehow. Quid pro quo. But Pete seems to genuinely like helping people. It's a hobby at this point. Cooper looked up from his homework. He's okay? More worry, aimed at a very different target. Clint let his guard drop enough for Cooper to see a bit of his own protectiveness. Depends on the day. Got a lot of demons in his head, and he didn't exactly care whether he lived or died until a few weeks ago. Cooper remained silent. But yeah, he's okay for now. Clint shrugged one shoulder. Can't say his health out in the elements doesn't keep me up, but he's tough. Trying to convince himself, Clint repeated it internally a few times. He's tough. He would have had to be to survive this far. But he hadn't really survived, had he? He'd just sort of reached the end of his rope, run out of funds and will to live. A new thought struck. What if Clint hadn't found him that day in the woods? Pete would be dead right now, a corpse in a hammock for them to find later, and a lost life for him to mourn on top of all the others. Clint closed his eyes. An image of Pete this morning, laughing at Clint spilling leftover pancake syrup across his shirt, was the only thing that calmed Clint from the dark tunnel his thoughts tripped down. For now, he's still out there, and he's fine. His children's laughter downstairs echoed the memory. Not for the first time, Clint wished Pete could experience that with them, wished that he was here and comfortable around people enough to be taken care of in more ways than just food and clothing and 2 hours of human company a day. When Clint opened his eyes, Cooper's cleared. You've got that look. What look? I don't have a look. Yeah, you do. The one you get when Nate tries a task by himself for the first time, or Lyla spent her first day at school alone. Cooper nudged Clint's hip. You're concerned, Dad. I know you haven't been sleeping well either. Not exactly a new thing. Cooper shook his head. Not like this. This isn't about bad dreams and memories. This is you not falling asleep at all, isn't it? Sometimes, Clint admitted. Cooper tapped his pen on the paper, lost in thought. Then he leaned back. He's good for you. I tell you I'm not sleeping, and that's the conclusion you draw? Cooper didn't take the bait. Maybe you didn't care what happened to you either before Pete. He may as well have shot Clint between the lungs and be done with it. Not true, Clint bit out. Cooper met his father's eyes square on. A little bit true. Don't lie to me. Clint stood and kissed Cooper on the top of his hair. Sorry, bud, that wasn't what I meant. I meant that I would never have left you guys, no matter how I felt during those months after you came back. Cooper rested into Clint's side, and a rinse of gratitude washed through Clint again that he didn't have teens who were too cool or insecure to show and receive affection. Then again, after the blip, few teenagers were. There had been too much upheaval and trauma to warrant any petty sense of image or independence. I know. I never doubted that. Clint kissed him one more time before heading for the door. Coop? Yeah? You were my first experience at being a dad, and a part of me never felt complete until you came along. Cooper groaned, belied by the soft way he smiled at Clint. "You don't have to remind me you still love me, Dad. Even with Pete around, I'm not a little kid."
"Oh, yes, I do." Clint was dead serious. "I waited 5 endless years to say it."
Cooper ducked his head, quietest of all his children. Clint had to brace himself on the doorknob at the thought of him leaving for college after his senior year next year. Clint wouldn't ever hold back his children from living their lives, but the pain of impending separation already nestled in his heart. "The blip turned you into a sap, you know that?" Cooper teased. Clint blew a mock kiss. "Takes one to know one."